Part 4. From Sleeping Pills to Society Transformed. Chapter 12. Things that go bump in the night, sleep disorders, and death caused by no sleep. Few other areas of medicine offer a more disturbing or astonishing array of disorders than those concerning sleep. Considering how tragic and remarkable disorders in those other fields can be, this is quite a claim. Yet, when you consider that oddities of slumber include daytime sleep attacks and body paralysis, homicidal sleepwalking, dream enactment, and perceived alien abductions, the assertion starts to sound more valid. Most astonishing of all, perhaps, is a rare form of insomnia that will kill you within months, supported by the life extinguishing upshot of extreme total sleep deprivation in animal studies. This chapter is by no means a comprehensive review of all sleep disorders, of which there are now over 100 known, nor is it meant to serve as a medical guide to any one disorder, since I am not a board-certified doctor of sleep medicine, but rather a sleep scientist. For those seeking advice on sleep disorders, I recommend visiting the National Sleep Foundation website, and there you will find resources on sleep centers near you. Rather than attempting a quick fire laundry list of the many tens of sleep disorders that exist, I have chosen to focus on a select few, namely somnambulism, insomnia, narcolepsy, and fatal familial insomnia, from the vantage point of science, and what the science of these disorders can meaningfully teach us about the mysteries of sleeping and dreaming. Somnambulism. The term somnambulism refers to sleep, somnus, disorders that involve some form of movement, ambulation. It encompasses conditions such as sleepwalking, sleep talking, sleep eating, sleep texting, sleep sex, and very rarely sleep homicide. Understandably, most people believe these events happen during REM sleep as an individual is dreaming and specifically acting out ongoing dreams. However, all these events arise from the deepest stage of non-dreaming sleep. And not dream sleep, if you rouse an individual from a sleepwalking event and ask what was going through their mind, rarely will they report a thing. No dream scenario, no mental experience. While we do not yet fully understand the cause of some somnambulism episodes, the existing evidence suggests that an unexpected spike in nervous system activity during deep sleep is one trigger. This electrical jolt compels the brain to rocket from the basement of deep and REM sleep all the way to the penthouse of wakefulness, but it gets stuck somewhere in between the 13th floor, if you will, trapped between the two worlds of deep sleep and wakefulness. The individual is confined to a state of mixed consciousness, neither wake nor sleep. In this confused condition, the brain performs basic but well-rehearsed actions such as walking over to a closet and opening it, placing a glass of water to the lips, or uttering a few words or sentences. A full diagnosis of somnambulism can require the patient to spend a night or two in a clinical sleep laboratory. Electrodes are placed on the head and body to measure the stages of sleep, and an infrared video camera on the ceiling records the nighttime events like a single night vision goggle. At the moment when a sleepwalking event occurs, the video camera footage and the electrical brainwave readouts stop agreeing. One suggests that the other one is lying. Watching the video the patient is clearly awake and behaving. They may sit up on the edge of the bed and begin talking. Others may attempt to put on clothes and walk out of the room. But look at brainwave activity and you realize that the patient, or at least their brain, is sound asleep. There are the clear and unmistakable slow electrical waves of deep and REM sleep, with no sign of fast, frenetic waking brain wave activity. For the most part, there is nothing pathological about sleepwalking or sleep talking. They are common in the adult population and even more common in children. It is not clear why children experience somnambulism more than adults, nor is it clear why some children grow out of having these nighttime events while others will continue to do so throughout their lives. One explanation of the former is simply the fact that we have greater amounts of deep and REM sleep when we are young, and therefore the statistical likelihood of sleepwalking and sleep talking episodes occurring is higher. Most episodes of the condition are harmless. Occasionally, however, adult somnambulism can result in a much more extreme set of behaviors, such as those performed by Kenneth Parks in 1987. Parks, who was 23 years old at the time, lived with his wife and 5-month-old daughter in Toronto. He had been suffering from severe insomnia caused by the stress of joblessness and gambling debts. By all accounts, Parks was a non-violent man. His mother-in-law, with whom he had a good relationship, called him a gentle giant on the basis of his placid nature, yet considerable height and broad-shouldered form. He stood 6'4" and weighed 225 pounds. Then came May 23. After falling asleep on the couch around 1:30 a.m. while watching television, Parks arose and got in his car barefoot. Depending on the roads, it is estimated that Parks drove approximately 14 miles to his in-laws' home. Upon entering the house, Parks made his way upstairs, stabbed his mother-in-law to death with a knife he had taken from their kitchen, and strangled his father-in-law unconscious after similarly attacking him with a cleaver. His father-in-law survived. Parks then got back in his car and upon regaining full waking consciousness at some point drove to a police station and said, "I think I have killed some people. My hands." Only then did he realize the blood flowing down his arms as a result of severing his own flexor tendons with the knife. Since he could remember only vague fragments of the murder, for example flashes of his mother-in-law's face with a "help me" look on it, had no motive, and had a long history of sleepwalking, as did other members of his family, a team of defense experts concluded that Ken Parks was asleep when he committed the crime, suffering a severe episode of sleepwalking. They argued that he was unaware of his actions, and thus not culpable. On May 25, 1988, a jury rendered a verdict of not guilty. This defense has been attempted in a number of subsequent cases, most of which have been unsuccessful. The story of Ken Parks is one of the most tragic kind, and to this day, Parks struggles with a guilt one suspects may never leave him. I offer the account not to scare the reader, nor to try to sensationalize the dire events of that late May night in 1987. Rather, I offer it to illustrate how non-volitional acts arising from sleep and its disorders can have very real legal, personal, and societal consequences, and demand the contribution of scientists and doctors in arriving at the appropriate legal justice. I also want to note for the concerned sleepwalkers reading this chapter that most somnambulism episodes, for example sleepwalking and talking, are considered benign and do not require intervention. Medicine will usually step in with treatment solutions only if the afflicted patient or his caretaker, partner, or parents, in the case of children, feels that the condition is compromising health or poses a risk. There are effective treatments, and it is a shame one never arrived in time for Ken Parks prior to that ill-fated evening in May. Insomnia. For many individuals these days, shadow coats have come home to roost around the phrase "a good night's sleep." As writer Will Self has lamented, insomnia, to which his grumblings owe their origin, is the most common sleep disorder. Many individuals suffer from insomnia, yet some believe they have the disorder when they do not. Before describing the features and causes of insomnia, and in the next chapter, potential treatment options, let me first describe what insomnia is not, and in doing so, reveal what it is. Being sleep deprived is not insomnia. In the field of medicine, sleep deprivation is considered as having the adequate ability to sleep, yet giving oneself an inadequate opportunity to sleep. That is, sleep deprived individuals can sleep if only they would take the appropriate time to do so. Insomnia is the opposite, suffering from an inadequate ability to generate sleep despite allowing oneself the adequate opportunity to get sleep. People suffering from insomnia therefore cannot produce sufficient sleep quantity or quality, even though they give themselves enough time to do so, 7 to 9 hours. Before moving on, it is worth noting the condition of sleep state misperception, also known as paradoxical insomnia. Here, patients will report having slept poorly throughout the night or even not sleeping at all. However, when these individuals have their sleep monitored objectively using electrodes or other accurate sleep monitoring devices, there is a mismatch. The sleep recordings indicate that the patient has slept far better than they themselves believe, and sometimes indicate that a completely full and healthy night of sleep occurred. Patients suffering from paradoxical insomnia therefore have an illusion or misperception of poor sleep that is not actually poor. As a result, such patients are treated as hypochondriacal. Though the term may seem dismissive or condescending, it is taken very seriously by sleep medicine doctors, and there are psychological interventions that help after the diagnosis is made. Returning to the condition of true insomnia, there are several different subtypes in the same way that there are numerous different forms of cancer, for example. One distinction separates insomnia into two kinds. The first is sleep onset insomnia, which is difficulty falling asleep. The second is sleep maintenance insomnia, or difficulty staying asleep. As the actor and comedian Billy Crystal has said when describing his own battles with insomnia, "I sleep like a baby. I wake up every hour." Sleep onset and sleep maintenance insomnia are not mutually exclusive. You can have one or the other or both. No matter which of these kinds of sleep problems is occurring, sleep medicine has very specific clinical boxes that must be checked for a patient to receive a diagnosis of insomnia. From now, there are dissatisfaction with sleep quality, for example, difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, early morning awakening, suffering significant distress or daytime impairment, has insomnia at least 3 nights each week for more than 3 months, does not have any coexisting mental disorders or medical conditions that could otherwise cause what appears to be insomnia. What this really means in terms of boots on the ground patients' descriptions is the following chronic situation: difficulty falling asleep, waking up in the middle of the night, waking up too early in the morning, difficulty falling back to sleep after waking up and feeling unrefreshed, throughout the waking day. If any of the characteristics of insomnia feel familiar to you and have been present for several months, I suggest you consider seeking out a sleep medicine doctor. I emphasize a sleep medicine doctor and not necessarily your GP, since GPs, superb as they often are, have surprisingly minimal sleep training during the entirety of medical school and residency. Some GPs are understandably apt to prescribe a sleeping pill, which is rarely the right answer, as we will see in the next chapter. The emphasis on duration of the sleep problem, more than 3 nights a week for more than 3 months, is important. All of us will experience difficulty sleeping every now and then, which may last just one night or several. That is normal. There is usually an obvious cause, such as work stress or a flare up in a social or romantic relationship. Once these things subside, though the sleep difficulty usually goes away, such acute sleep problems are generally not recognized as chronic insomnia, since clinical insomnia requires an ongoing duration of sleep difficulty week after week after week. Even with this strict definition, chronic insomnia is disarmingly common. Approximately 1 out of every 9 people you pass on the streets will meet the strict clinical criteria for insomnia, which translates to more than 40 million Americans struggling to make it through their waking days due to wide-eyed nights. While the reasons remain unclear, insomnia is almost twice as common in women than in men, and it is unlikely that a simple unwillingness of men to admit sleep problems explains this very sizable difference between the two sexes. Race and ethnicity also make a significant difference, with African Americans and Hispanic Americans suffering higher rates of insomnia than Caucasian Americans, findings that have important implications for well-recognized health disparities in these communities, such as diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease, which have known links to a lack of sleep. In truth, insomnia is likely to be a more widespread and serious problem than an even this sizable number suggests. Should you relax the stringent clinical criteria and just use epidemiological data as a guide, it is probable that 2 out of every 3 people reading this book will regularly have difficulty falling or staying asleep at least one night a week every week. Without belaboring the point, insomnia is one of the most pressing and prevalent medical issues facing modern society, yet few speak of it this way, recognize the burden, or feel there is a need to act. That the sleep aid industry, encompassing prescription sleeping medications and over-the-counter sleep remedies, is worth an astonishing $30 billion a year in the US, is perhaps the one statistic one needs in order to realize how truly grave the problem is. Desperate millions of us are willing to pay a lot of money for a good night's sleep. But dollars values do not address the more important issue of what's causing insomnia. Genetics plays a role, though it is not the full answer. Insomnia shows some degree of genetic heritability, with estimates of 28 to 45% transmission rates from parent to child. However, this still leaves the majority of insomnia being associated with non-genetic causes or gene environment nature-nurture interactions. To date, we have discovered numerous triggers that cause sleep difficulties, including psychological, physical, medical, and environmental factors, with aging being another, as we have previously discussed. External factors that cause poor sleep, such as too much bright light at night, the wrong ambient room temperature, caffeine, tobacco, and alcohol consumption, all of which we'll visit in more detail in the next chapter, can masquerade as insomnia. However, their origins are not from within you and therefore not a disorder of you. Rather, they are influences from outside, and once they are addressed, individuals will get better sleep without changing anything about themselves. Other factors, however, come from within a person and are innate biological causes of insomnia noted in the clinical criteria described above. These factors cannot be a symptom of a disease, for example, Parkinson's disease, or side effects of medication, for example, asthma medication. Rather, the cause or causes of the sleep problem must stand alone in order for you to be primarily suffering from true insomnia. The two most common triggers of chronic insomnia are psychological, one emotional concerns or worry, and two emotional distress or anxiety. In this fast-paced, information overloaded modern world, one of the few times that we stop our persistence informational conception and inwardly reflect is when our heads hit the pillow. There is no worse time to consciously do this. Little wonder that sleep becomes nearly impossible to initiate or maintain when the spine and cogs of our emotional minds start turning, anxiously worrying about things we did today, things that we forgot to do, things that we must face in the coming days, and even those far in the future. There is no kind of invitation for beckoning the calm of brain waves of sleep into your brain, peacefully allowing you to drift off into a full night of restful slumber. Since psychological distress is a principal instigator of insomnia, researchers have focused on examining the biological causes that underlie emotional turmoil. One common culprit has become clear: an overactive sympathetic nervous system, which, as we have discussed in previous chapters, is the body's aggravated fight or flight mechanism. The sympathetic nervous system switches on in response to threats and acute stress that in our evolutionary past was required to mobilize a legitimate fight or flight response. The physiological consequences are increased heart rate, blood flow, metabolic rate, the release of stress negotiating chemicals such as cortisol, and increased brain activation, all of which are beneficial in the acute moment of true threat or danger. However, the fight or flight response is not meant to be left in the on position for any prolonged period of time. As we have already touched upon in earlier chapters, chronic activation of the flight nervous system causes myriad health problems, one of which is now recognized to be insomnia. Why an overactive fight or flight nervous system prevents good sleep can be explained by several of the topics we have discussed so far, and some we have not. First, the raised metabolic rate triggered by fight or flight nervous system activity, which is common in insomnia patient, results in a higher core body temperature. You may remember from chapter 2 that we must drop core body temperature by a few degrees to initiate sleep, which becomes more difficult in insomnia patients suffering a raised metabolic rate and higher operating internal temperature, including in the brain. Second are higher levels of the alertness promoting homocortisol and sister neurochemicals adrenaline and noradrenaline. All three of these chemicals raise heart rate. Normally, our cardiovascular system calms down as we make the transition into light and then deep sleep. Elevated cardiac activity makes that transition more difficult. All three of these chemicals increase metabolic rate, additionally increasing core body temperature, which further compounds the first problem outlined above. Third, and related to these chemicals, are altered patterns of brain activity linked with the body's sympathetic nervous system Researchers have placed healthy sleepers and insomnia patients in a brain scanner and measured the change in patterns of activity as both groups try to fall asleep. In the good sleepers, the parts of the brain related to insights and emotions, the amygdala, and those linked to memory, retrospection, the hippocampus, quickly ramp down in their levels of activity as they transition towards sleep, as did basic alertness regions in the brainstem. This was not the case for the insomnia patients. Their emotion generating regions and memory recollection centers all remained active. This was similarly true of the basic vigilance centers in the brainstem that stubbornly continued their wakeful watch. The thalamus, the sensory gate of the brain that needs to close shut to allow sleep, remained active and open for business insomnia patients. Simply put, the insomnia patients could not disengage from a pattern of altering, worrisome, ruminative brain activity. Think of a time when you closed the lid of a laptop to put it to sleep, but came back later to find that the screen was still on, the cooling fans were still running, and the computer was still active, despite the closed lid. Normally, this is because programs and routines are still running and the computer cannot make the transition into sleep mode. Based on the results of brain imaging studies, an analogous problem is occurring in insomnia patients. Recursive loops of emotional programs, together with retrospective and prospective memory loops, keep playing in the mind, preventing the brain from shutting down and switching into sleep mode. It is telling that a direct and causal connection exists between the fight or flight branch of the nervous system and all of these emotion, memory, and alertness related regions of the brain. Bi-directional line of communication between the body and brain amounts to a vicious, recurrent cycle that fuels their thwarting of sleep. The fourth and final set of identified changes has been observed in the quality of sleep of insomnia patients when they do finally drift off. Once again, these appear to have their origins in an overactive fight or flight nervous system. Patients with insomnia have a lower quality of sleep reflected in shallower, less powerful electrical brain waves during deep NREM. They also have more fragmented REM sleep, peppered by brief awakenings that they are not always aware of, yet still cause a degraded quality of dream sleep, all of which means that insomnia patients wake up not feeling refreshed. Consequently, patients are unable to function well during the day cognitively and or emotionally. In this way, insomnia is really a 24/7 disorder, as much a disorder of the day as of the night. You can now understand how physiologically complex the underlying condition is. No wonder the blunt instruments of sleeping pills, which simply and primitively sedate your higher brain or cortex, are no longer recommended as the first-line treatment approach for insomnia by the American Medical Association. Fortunately, a non-pharmacological therapy, which we will discuss in detail in the next chapter, has been developed. It is more powerful in restoring naturalistic sleep in insomnia sufferers, and it elegantly targets each of the physiological components of insomnia described above. Real optimism is to be found in these new non-drug therapies, and I urge you to explore should you suffer from true insomnia. Narcolepsy. I suspect that you cannot recall any true significant action in your life that wasn't governed by two very simple rules: staying away from something that would feel bad or trying to accomplish something that would feel good. This law of approach and avoidance dictates most of human and animal behavior from a very early age. The forces that implement this law are positive and negative emotions. Emotions make us do things, as the name suggests. Remove the first letter from the word. They motivate our remarkable achievements, incite us to try again when we fail, keep us safe from potential harm, urge us to accomplish rewarding and beneficial outcomes, and compel us to cultivate social and romantic relationships. In short, emotions, in an appropriate amount, make life worth living. They offer a healthy and vital existence, psychologically and biologically speaking. Take them away, and you face a sterile existence with no highs or lows to speak of. Emotionless, you will simply exist rather than live. Tragically, this is the very kind of reality many narcoleptic patients are forced to adopt for reasons we will now explore. Medically, narcolepsy is considered to be a neurological disorder, meaning that its origins are within the central nervous system, specifically the brain. The condition usually emerges between ages 10 and 20 years. There is some genetic basis to narcolepsy, but it is not inherited. Instead, the genetic cause appears to be a mutation, so the disorder is not passed from parent to child. However, gene mutations, at least as we currently understand them in the context of this disorder, do not explain all instances of narcolepsy. Other triggers remain to be identified. Narcolepsy is also not unique to humans, with numerous other mammals expressing the disorder. There are at least three core symptoms that make up the disorder: 1. Excessive daytime sleepiness, 2. Sleep paralysis, and 3. Cataplexy. The first symptom of excessive daytime sleepiness is often the most disruptive and problematic to the quality of day-to-day life for narcoleptic patients. It involves daytime sleep attacks, overwhelming, utterly irresistible urges to sleep at times when you want to be awake, such as working at your desk, driving, or eating a meal with family or friends. Having read this sentence, I suspect many of you are thinking, "Oh my goodness, I have narcolepsy." That is unlikely. It is far more probable that you are suffering from chronic sleep deprivation. About 1 in every 2,000 people suffers from narcolepsy, making it about as common as multiple sclerosis. The sleep attacks that typify excessive daytime sleepiness are usually the first symptom to appear, just to give you a sense of what that feeling is, relative to what you may be considering. It would be the sleepiness equivalent of staying awake for 3 to 4 days straight. The second symptom of narcolepsy is sleep paralysis, the frightening loss of ability to talk or move when waking up from sleep. In a sense, you become temporarily locked in your body. Most of these events occur in REM sleep. You remember that during REM sleep, the brain paralyzes the body to keep you from acting out your dreams. Normally, when we wake out of a dream, the brain releases the body from the paralysis in perfect synchrony right at the moment when waking consciousness returns. However, there can be rare occasions when the paralysis of the REM state lingers on despite the brain having terminated sleep, rather like that last guest at a party who seems unwilling to recognize the event is over and it is time to leave the premises. As a result, you begin to wake up, but you are unable to lift your eyelids, turn over, cry out, or move any of the muscles that control your limbs. Gradually, the paralysis of REM sleep does wear off, and you regain control of your body, including your eyelids, arms, legs, and mouth. Don't worry if you have had an episode of sleep paralysis at some point in your life. It is not unique to narcolepsy. Around 1 in 4 healthy individuals will experience sleep paralysis, which is to say that it is as common as hiccups. I myself have experienced sleep paralysis several times, and I do not suffer from narcolepsy. Narcoleptic patients will, however, experience sleep paralysis far more frequently than healthy individuals. This nevertheless means that sleep paralysis is a symptom associated with narcolepsy, but it is not unique to narcolepsy. A brief detour of an otherworldly kind is in order at this moment. When individuals undergo a sleep paralysis episode, it is often associated with feelings of dread and a sense of an intruder being present in the room. The fear comes from an inability to act in response to the perceived threat, such as not being able to shout out, stand up, and leave the room, or prepare to defend oneself. It is this set of features of sleep paralysis that we now believe explains a large majority of alien abduction claims. Rarely do you hear of aliens accosting an individual in the middle of the day, with testimonial witnesses standing in plain sight, them struck by the extraterrestrial kidnapping in progress. Instead, most alleged alien abductions take place at night. Most classic alien visitations in Hollywood movies, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind of E.T., also occur at night. Moreover, victims of claimed alien abductions frequently report the sense of a or real presence of a being in the room, the alien. Finally, and this is the key giveaway, the alleged victim frequently describes having been injected with a paralyzing agent. Consequently, the victim will describe wanting to fight back, run away, or call out for help, but being unable to do so. The offending force is, of course, not aliens, but the persistence of REM sleep paralysis upon awakening. The third and most astonishing core symptom of narcolepsy is called cataplexy. The word comes from the Greek kata, meaning down, and plexus, meaning a stroke or seizure, that is, a falling down seizure. However, a cataplectic attack is not a seizure at all, but rather a sudden loss of muscle control. This can range from slight weakness, wherein the head droops, the face sags, the jaw drops, and speech becomes slurred, to a buckling of knees or a sudden and immediate loss of all muscle tone, resulting in total collapse on the spot. You may be old enough to remember a child's toy that involved an animal, often a donkey, standing on a small palm-sized pedestal with a button underneath. It was similar to a puppet on strings, except that the strings were not attached to the outside limbs, but rather woven through the limbs on the inside and connected to the button underneath. Depressing the button relaxed the inner string tension, and the donkey would collapse into a heap. Release the button, pulling the inner strings taut, and the donkey would snap back upright to firm attention. The demolition of muscle tone that occurs during a full-blown cataplectic attack, resulting in total body collapse, is very much like this toy, but the consequences are no laughing matter. If this were not wicked enough, there is an extra layer of malevolence to the condition that truly devastates the patient's quality of life. Cataplectic attacks are not random, but are triggered by moderate or strong emotions, positive or negative. Tell a funny joke to a narcoleptic patient, and they may literally collapse in front of you. Walk into a room and surprise a patient, perhaps while they are chopping food with a sharp knife, and they will collapse perilously. Even standing in a nice warm shower can be enough of a pleasurable experience to cause a patient's legs to buckle and have a potentially dangerous fall caused by the cataplectic muscle loss. Now extrapolate this and consider the dangers of driving a car and being startled by a loud horn, or playing an enjoyable game with your children, or having them jump on you and tickle you, or feeling strong tear well enjoy one of their musical school recitals. In a narcoleptic patient with cataplexy, any one of these may cause the sufferer to collapse into the immobilized prison of his or her own body. Consider then how difficult it is to have a loving, pleasurable sexual relationship with a narcoleptic partner. The list becomes endless with predictable and heart-wrenching outcomes. Unless patients are willing to accept these crumpling attacks, which is really no option of any kind, all hope of living an emotionally fulfilling life must be abandoned. A narcoleptic patient is banished to a monotonic existence of emotional neutrality. They must forfeit any semblance of succulent emotions that we are all nourished by on a moment to moment basis. It is the dietary equivalent of eating the same tepid bowl of an unflavorful porridge day after day. You can well imagine the loss of appetite for such a life. If you saw a patient collapse under the influence of cataplexy, you would be convinced that they had fallen completely unconscious or into a powerful sleep. This is untrue. Patients are awake and continue to perceive the outside world around them. Instead, what the strong emotion has triggered is the total or sometimes partial body paralysis of REM sleep without the sleep of the REM state itself. Cataplexy is therefore an abnormal functioning of the REM sleep circuitry within the brain, wherein one of its features, muscle atonia, is inappropriately deployed while the individual is awake and behaving rather than asleep and dreaming. We can, of course, explain this to an adult patient, lowering their anxiety during the event through comprehension of what is happening and help them rein in or avoid emotional highs and lows to reduce cataplectic occurrences. However, this is much more difficult in a 10-year-old youngster. How can you explain such a villainous symptom and disorder to a child with narcolepsy? And how do you prevent a child from enjoying the normal roller coaster of emotional existence? That is a natural and integral part of a growing life and developing brain, which is to say, how do you prevent a child from being a child? There are no easy answers to these questions. We are, however, beginning to discover the neurological basis of narcolepsy and, in conjunction, more about healthy sleep itself. In Chapter 3, I describe the parts of the brain involved in the maintenance of normal wakefulness, the alerting, activating regions of the brainstem, and the sensory gate of the thalamus that sits on top. A setup that looks almost like a scoop of ice cream. Thalamus on a cone, brainstem. As the brainstem powers down at night, it removes its stimulating influence to the sensory gate of the thalamus. With the closing of the sensory gate, we stop perceiving the outside world and thus we fall asleep. What I did not tell you, however, was how the brainstem knows that it's time to turn off the lights, so to speak, and power down wakefulness to begin sleep. Something has to switch the activating influence of the brainstem off, and in doing so, allow sleep to be switched on. That switch, the sleep-wake switch, is located just below the thalamus and in the center of the brain in a region called the hypothalamus. It is the same neighborhood that houses the 24-hour master biological clock, perhaps unsurprisingly. The sleep-wake switch within the hypothalamus has a direct line of communication to the power station regions of the brainstem, like an electrical light switch. It can flip the power on, wake, or off, sleep. To do this, the sleep-wake switch in the hypothalamus releases a neurotransmitter called orexin. You can think of orexin as a chemical finger that flips the switch to the on-wakefulness position. When orexin is released down onto your brainstem, the switch has been unambiguously flipped, powering up the wakefulness generating centers of the brainstem. Once activated by the switch, the brainstem pushes open the sensory gate of the thalamus, allowing the perceptual world to flood into your brain, transitioning you to full stable wakefulness. At night, the opposite happens. The sleep-wake switch stops releasing orexin into the brainstem. The chemical finger has now flipped switch to the off position, shutting down the rousing influence from the power station of the brainstem. The sensory business being conducted within the thalamus is closed down by a sealing of the sensory gate, with perceptual contact with the outside world, and now sleep. Lights off, lights on, lights off, lights on. This is the neurobiological job of the sleep-wake switch in the hypothalamus, controlled by orexin. Ask an engineer what the essential properties of a basic electrical switch are, and they will inform you of an imperative. The switch must be definitive. It must either be fully on or fully off, a binary state. It must not float in a wishy-washy manner between the on and off positions. Otherwise, the electrical system will not be stable or predictable. Unfortunately, this is exactly what happens to the sleep-wake switch in the disorder of narcolepsy, caused by marked abnormalities of orexin. Scientists have examined the brains of narcoleptic patients in painstaking detail after they have passed away. During these post-mortem investigations, they discovered a loss of almost 90% of all the cells that produce orexin. Worse still, the welcome sites or receptors of orexin that cover the surface of the power station of the brain seem more significantly reduced in number in narcoleptic patients relative to normal individuals. Because of this lack of orexin, made worse by the reduced number of receptor sites to receive what little orexin does strip down, the sleep-wake state of the narcoleptic brain is unstable, like a faulty flip-flop switch, never definitively on or off. The brain of a narcoleptic patient wobbles precariously around a middle point, teeter-tottering between sleep and wakefulness. The orexin deficient state of the sleep-wake system is the main cause of the first and primary symptom of narcolepsy, which is excessive daytime sleepiness and the surprise attacks of sleep that can happen at any moment without the strong finger of orexin pushing the sleep-wake switch all the way over into a definitive on position. Narcoleptic patients cannot sustain resolute wakefulness throughout the day. For the same reasons, narcoleptic patients have terrible sleep at night, dipping into and out of slumber in choppy fashion, like a faulty light switch that endlessly flickers on and off day and night. So goes the erratic sleep and wake experience suffered by a narcoleptic patient across each and every 24-hour period. Despite wonderful work by many of my colleagues, narcolepsy currently represents a failure of sleep research at the level of effective treatments. While we have effective interventions for other sleep disorders such as insomnia and sleep apnea, we lag far behind the curve for treating narcolepsy. This is in part due to the rarity of the condition, making it unprofitable for drug companies to invest the research effort, which is often a driver of fast treatment progress in medicine. For the first symptom of narcolepsy, daytime sleep attacks, the only treatment used to be high doses of the wake-promoting drug amphetamine, but amphetamine is powerfully addictive. It is also a dirty drug, meaning that it is promiscuous and affects many different chemical systems in the brain and body, leading to terrible side effects. A newer, cleaner drug called Provigil is now used to help narcoleptic patients stay more stably awake during the day and has fewer downsides, yet it is marginally effective. Antidepressants are often prescribed to help with the second and third symptoms of narcolepsy, sleep paralysis, and cataplexy, as they suppress REM sleep, and it is REM sleep paralysis that is integral to these two symptoms. Nevertheless, antidepressants simply lower the incidence of both. They do not eradicate them. Overall, the treatment outlook for narcoleptic patients is bleak at present, and there is no cure in sight. Much of the treatment fate of narcolepsy sufferers and their families resides in the slower progressing hands of academic research, rather than the more rapid progression of big pharmaceutical companies. For now, patients simply must try to manage life with the disorder, living as best they can. Some of you may have had the same realization that several drug companies did when we learned about the role of orexin and the sleep-wake switch in narcolepsy. Could we reverse engineer the knowledge and rather than enhance orexin to give narcoleptic patients more stable wakefulness during the day, try and shut it off at night, thereby offering a novel way of inducing sleep in insomnia patients? Pharmaceutical companies are indeed trying to develop compounds that can block orexin at night, forcing it to flip the switch to the off position, potentially inducing more naturalistic sleep than the problematic and sedating sleep drugs we currently have. Unfortunately, the first of these drugs, suvorexant, brand name Belsombra, has not proved to be the magic bullet many hoped. Patients in the FDA mandated clinical trials fell asleep just 6 minutes faster than those taking a placebo, while future formulations may prove more efficacious non-pharmacological methods for the treatment of insomnia outlined in the next chapter remain a far superior option for insomnia sufferers.